All right, everybody, welcome back into Sports and Money. I'm Ben Parker. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us today. We're covering the Miami Dolphins. This is the second video about their off-season. It's the second critical video about their off-season. And listen, for those of you who are Dolphins fans, I'm not trying to troll your team. I'm not trying to troll the organization necessarily. I'm not trying to pick anybody out or trying to be unfair. It's just that the deeper we dive into some of the moves they've made in the off seasons, the worse it really looks, especially from a financial standpoint, also from a leadership standpoint. We'll get into that in just a minute. I like the Dolphins franchise. I like their logo. I like their uniform. I like their history from the 70s and the 80s. I would really enjoy watching the Dolphins go to the playoffs from time to time, maybe rack up a Super Bowl win or two, but right now they've made some decisions that just don't look good really any way you slice it. We're going to cover that again here in just a minute. But in a couple of weeks, if you're a Dolphins fan, I've got a couple of good videos coming up about some positive things that they have done this offseason. I'm not trying to say that they're inept, not trying to say that they haven't done some good things, but we're going to look at some bad things that they've done this week and take a look at that. All right, start off. The Ndamukong Suh deal and the Jarvis Landry deal really just jump off the page to me, as well as the Jay Ajayi move back in the fall. You might say, hey, the Jay Ajayi move was forever ago, but it's really all part of the same initiative. We're being told the same things about all three of these players, both Jarvis Landry, Ndamukong Suh, and Jay Ajayi, and that is this, that they're a problem in the locker room, that somehow they're so bad that they can't be adapted on this team, that in spite of their talent, and all three players have talent to different degrees, in spite of their production, and all three players were producing consistently, in spite of that, we're being told that all three of these players were such a headache, such a hassle, such a tremendous poison in the locker room, toxic is the word that keeps coming up, especially about Suh. We're being told that the Dolphins Brain Trust has decided to get rid of all three players. Now, the Dolphins Brain Trust is who? You know them well. If you're a Dolphins fan, owner Stephen Ross, Mike Tannenbaum, the executive vice president, Chris Greer, he's the general manager, and then, of course, Adam Gase is your head coach. These are the guys who are making the decisions. I'm not going to pinpoint any one of these guys. I'm also not going to try to say that any one of these guys is inept or doesn't know how to do his job or that he can't win in the future. I'm just saying right now for this decision-making process in this offseason, it really doesn't look good, and here's why. Let's start with the Ndamukong Suh deal. Number one, $22 million dead cap they used to release him. Let me say that again. I'm going to keep hitting that. $22 million in dead cap space. That is a phenomenal hit on your salary cap. We live in a day and age where NFL teams are scrapping to try to come up with $1.5 million to sign some other player, when they're scrapping to come up with $8 to $10 million to sign their draft class, or $14 million, depending on how many draft picks they've got. And here the Dolphins are releasing Suh. They decided he's such a bad headache that they're willing to take a $22 million dead cap hit for that, broken up over 2 seasons. Now, listen, I'm not here to defend Suh. I'm not here to tell you that he's the greatest personality in the world or the easiest to get along with, but I will say this, he was producing on the field and producing at a very high level and has done so his whole career. His struggles and troubles are well documented. His personality, his on-field penalties, some of the locker room issues that he does bring, I'm not trying to defend that. What I'm saying is it takes some more headache to decide that you want to take a $22 million cap hit over this season and next season just for him not to be on the team. And listen, he was very quickly eaten up by the Rams. If the Rams were worried about him destroying their locker room, they wouldn't have him on the team. They've got a team full of young players, a couple of veterans, but they've got a lot of young players mixed in there. And they weren't worried about it. They signed him for $14 million 1 year. You might say, yeah, it's low risk, but still, they were not worried about having Suh come onto that team and destroy their locker room. They got him very quickly. So the Dolphins, though, let him go and took $22 million dead cap hit to do it. There are other ways that the thing with Suh could have been handled. The biggest issue I have with letting Suh go is that it should have been done next offseason. If you do it next offseason, you save somewhere in the neighborhood of $14, $15 million. You don't take quite the dead cap hit. You save a ton of money, and you can actually use that money in next offseason. This offseason, though, they really are taking a big hit. They will next offseason as well. Another thing you could have done with Suh, if you wanted to keep him for another year, sit down, have a meeting with Ndamukong Suh, talk to him, say, hey, listen, we don't like your effort on the field. We don't like the way you're conducting yourself in the locker room. This is something that Adam Gase would have to do, or something that maybe owner Stephen Ross would have to sit down together, get Sue's agent in the room, get Mike Tannenbaum in the room, sit down, have a meeting with Sue and say, hey, listen, we're kind of tied to you financially because we don't want to take a $22 million dead cap hit over the next 2 seasons. We're kind of tied to you financially. We made a commitment to you a couple of seasons ago when we gave you this humongous contract. We decided that whatever personality issues you brought with it were worth it for the on-field play that you were going to produce, and by and large, he has produced. Sit down with Sue, have a meeting, get his agent, get the owner in, get Tannenbaum, the vice president in, sit down, say, hey, listen, we're going to let you go next off season. We want to have one more season with you. Can you try to make this as good a season as you can? Sit down with him. Have a respectful meeting with him. He's an adult. You're an adult. Try to work that out. Also, the Dolphins, and this repeatedly seemed to come up, the Dolphins seem to not have had the veteran leadership in the locker room to make some of these players respect them and respect the decision-making that was being made. And that's the third thing here, the veteran leadership. When you go to a lot of other teams, especially successful teams, they've got veteran leaders who are going to hold all the other players in line. Because no matter how good the head coach is, or no matter how much respect you have for the head coach, some guys just have really huge personalities. Some guys just really need to be kept in check by the other players. And the Dolphins really seem to not have had those other players. They seem to have gone out and gotten some of those other players, but in the meantime, they're taking $22 million cap hits and letting go of incredibly talented players to do that. So it's just not a good decision for the Dolphins, no matter which way you slice it. Again, if letting Sue go for $10 million was going to save you $15 million, like it might next offseason, I wouldn't mind this as much. But you were taking a brutal cap hit to let this guy go in the other ways. Bring in a couple of veteran players, people that he would respect. Find out who it is around the league that he respects. Somebody who's a veteran who's not going to cost you a lot. Bring him in. A linebacker, another defensive tackle, a defensive end, somebody that he respects, that he can work with. Seems like there wasn't a whole lot of that going on in the Dolphins locker room. Same thing, listen, for the other players. Jarvis Landry. Let's look at him. Jarvis Landry. The biggest problem I have with the Jarvis Landry deal is not that they traded him away. It's how little they got and how late they made this decision. They got a 4th round pick this year and a 7th round pick next year. That is almost a giveaway. It's not a complete giveaway, but it's almost a giveaway. Most of the experts, and I'm not a trade expert by any stretch, but most of the experts that you read after suggest that the Dolphins could have gotten more for Jarvis Landry in this offseason had they just waited and been a little more patient. Had they kind of moved past the free agent market for wide receivers when the demand was still there, teams that already locked up the wide receivers that they could get off the free agent market, try to trade Landry then, been a little more patient, they could have got more for Landry this offseason. Even if that's not the case, and I don't know that it is the case that they could have gotten more, I feel like it is. A 4 and a 7 feels really, really cheap for a guy who's under a contract for this season coming up at a $14 million cap hit. It feels really, really cheap. But even if not, they should have known ahead of time that they wanted to trade him. Trade him last offseason when his value is higher, when he's still got a bargain deal in 2017 at a ridiculously low, I think it was 1.5, 2 million, somewhere in that ballpark, and then another 5th-year option if the team wanted to pick that up. His value would have been higher because a team could have had him for 2 off seasons, not just 1. You might say, well, they didn't know they wanted to let him go. Listen, if you're an NFL executive, if you're an executive of any team in any major sports franchise, it is your job to look ahead every day and see what your team is going to look like a year from now, 2 years from now, to see whether or not you can sign a guy when his contract is up, to see whether or not you really want that guy on your team. It's your job to look ahead. And the Dolphins, I feel like if they had really been on top of this, really been doing their homework, they could have even traded Jarvis Landry last offseason and definitely gotten more for him. Listen, he's been highly productive. I've heard a lot of people criticize Jarvis Landry because he doesn't have a lot of yards after the catch, because the Dolphins didn't have a tight end, and therefore that opened up a lot of windows for Landry over the middle. You can criticize him all you want. His production is there. He's 100 catches a year kind of a guy. is very dependable. He's very healthy. He's been very hungry to this point in his career. He produces on the field. Again, though, the Dolphins are saying this guy is such a big headache that we just didn't want to deal with him. This guy's such a big headache, we just needed to get him off the team. We didn't like his effort, and Adam Gase came out this past week and talked about the Buffalo Bills game, and I respect Adam Gase for being honest with everybody about that. For me, if I'm looking at what the Dolphins are doing, this feels reactionary and it feels emotional. And that's two things you just cannot be if you're going to make decisions for any business anywhere, but especially a high-dollar sports franchise. You cannot be reactionary. You have to be visionary. You have to look ahead. You cannot just look back and say, man, this is what hit us, so this is what we're going to do now. You have to look ahead and have some vision about what you're trying to do, how you're trying to build your football team. Also, you can't be emotional. Some of this just feels emotional. It just feels like the Dolphins head coaches and coaching staff can't get along with some of these players, like the players don't respect them maybe, or as if the players don't respect the other players in the locker room. There's just not enough veteran leadership in that locker room. It just feels like there are some respect and leadership problems inside of this locker room, and that's contributing to why they're letting some really good players go. Now, I put the J trade back in November, I think it was, in the same boat. We heard the same things, that J somehow was poisonous, that he didn't have a good attitude, not a good work ethic, not a good influence, not a good personality in the locker room. If you're consistently hearing the same things about different players from the front office, from the organization, then you have to start wondering, are the players the problem, or is it the front office? Is it really the players that are causing all these issues and troubles, or are there some deeper leadership struggles here going on as well, some respect factor going on? It's a fair question to ask. I'm not here to smear mud on anybody, I'm not trying to take anybody down, but it's a fair question to ask when you hear the same problems coming up with different players. And listen, if a head coach ever wants to come in, wants to clear out a locker room, wants to change the culture, as the Dolphins claim to be doing, I understand that. I'm not against that. Sometimes that needs to happen. But Adam Gase is 2 years in. Mike Tannenbaum is even deeper in with the Dolphins than that. These guys have had time to set things up and try to build the football team. This feels like emotional decision-making midstream. It just doesn't feel good. And listen, these are some talented players you're letting go. These are some of the best players you had on the team. Sometimes talented players are really difficult to get along with. They're really difficult to manage. They're very difficult to coach. Strong personalities, players who have a lot of talent tend to have strong personalities. And you've got to have a coaching staff, you've got to have a front office, you've got to have veteran leaders that they respect. You've got to have that. If you look up at the Seattle Seahawks, listen, the Seattle Seahawks for the past 6-7 years have had a locker room full of strong personalities, and it's well documented. The guys that they've got up there, very talented players, who if you took any one of those players and put them on another team, like the Cleveland Browns, or like the Chicago Bears, or like some other team where losing tends to be prevalent, that strong personality can all of a sudden be viewed as a hothead. They can be viewed as not putting out the effort you want. They can be viewed as toxic. They can be viewed as creating locker room problems, viewed as having a bad personality, when really they're just very talented and have strong personalities. I want to make some analogies here. You think about Rob Gronkowski over in New England. If Rob Gronkowski, as talented as he is, was put on another team, a team where there was a lot of losing, wasn't a lot of winning, a lot of finger pointing, he could possibly be viewed as a locker room problem. He could be viewed as a distraction. He could be viewed as the kind of player that NFL teams wanted to kind of shy away from if you didn't have a strong veteran leadership presence in the locker room. But the Patriots have managed to make it work. Go back a decade, Randy Moss was largely viewed as uncoachable. Randy Moss, before he went to the Patriots, was largely viewed as a headache not worth dealing with. He goes to the New England Patriots, where you have Belichick that everybody already respects, Brady that everybody already respects, some other guys on the team who have a lot of veteran leadership, very, very respectful guys, and Randy Moss instantly turns the team into one of the best ever, one of the best single seasons we've ever seen. Brady throws for 50 touchdowns, the team almost goes undefeated, just barely losing in the Super Bowl. You go back to the 90s, to the NBA, Dennis Rodman. I don't think there's ever been a bigger headache in sports, possibly, than Dennis Rodman was. And listen, Dennis Rodman goes to the Chicago Bulls, and all he does is win. And all he does is continue to win when he's on the Chicago Bulls. Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Phil Jackson, they're able to keep him in check. While we're on Phil Jackson, let's fast forward about 5-6 years. You've got the Los Angeles Lakers, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal. Everybody's saying these guys are uncoachable. They can't get along. Nobody can coach these guys. Phil Jackson comes in. All they do is win. Sometimes talented players, and this is important to remember, for Ndamukong Suh, for Jarvis Landry, for Jay Ajay, sometimes talented players have really strong personalities. It's very difficult to get them to do what you want them to do. If they don't respect you, they're not going to do it. If there are some other players in the locker room that they don't respect, you're not going to get them to do anything that you want them to do. You've got to have respect from the head coaching level, from the front office level, and from the other players in the locker room. So that's why I don't like these deals. Listen, Suh, if Suh didn't cost anything to let him go, then fine, let him go. If Suh didn't cost $22 million in dead cap space to let him go, fine, send him away. Jarvis Landry, if you're getting more out of him, if you're getting a second-round pick and a fifth-round pick, it's worth thinking about, absolutely. All you got was a 4 and a 7. Not a good deal. Suh, not a good deal. You got nothing out of him. And what you've seen here, and I'm almost done, I know this is a long video, what you've seen here is the Dolphins, in an effort to change the culture, which I'm not against. Sometimes you need to change the culture. In an effort to change the culture, they have let their most talented players go. And in reality, when you're doing that, you're not the Patriots, you're the Browns. We've seen the Browns do this a couple of seasons ago. They let their most talented players go. At least the Cleveland Browns had a plan. They were stockpiling assets and doing it very well, creating a ton of cap space. The Miami Dolphins have done neither. The Miami Dolphins have not created the cap space. They have not stockpiled assets. All they've done is let some of their best players go, some of their most talented guys. And that hurts. That shows up on the field. I shut it down with this. I always hear, every time anybody gets rid of a player who's kind of a headache, somebody who's really not buying into the team concept, if you will, I always hear, well, that's the way the Patriots do it. That's the way the Patriots do it. The Patriots are all about team. The Patriots are all about getting the right 53 men on the roster, according to Bill Belichick. Listen, I've said this before, I'll say it again. When you have a Hall of Fame quarterback and a Hall of Fame coach, come see me and we'll talk about doing it the way the Patriots do it. If you don't have a Hall of Fame coach, a guy who can coach and really raise your team, or a quarterback who can really elevate your team to the next level, then you might ought to look at a different way of doing things. You might not want to let your most talented players go. The Patriots consistently do not have the most talented team on the field. They have always had, over the past decade, an average team in terms of talent, maybe slightly above average. But Tom Brady covers up for a lot of those lack of talent. So does Bill Belichick with his ability to coach and build a football team. Can it be done that way? Yes. But Brady and Belichick cover up consistently every single week and in the playoffs and in the Super Bowls for a severe lack of talent that they have due to Bill Belichick's decision making. All right, so I know I'm trolling the Dolphins here. I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to smear mud. Listen, this is the reason we don't like what the Dolphins are doing right now. We'll talk more about them coming up. Thank you everybody who's subscribed. Thank you everybody for the views, the likes. If there's stuff you don't like, let us know. We appreciate all the feedback. See you next time on Sports and Money. I'm Ben Parker. Thank you. Bye.